I came home after a year. 2 mansions were sitting on my land. After nearly a year overseas, I drove back to my Arizona ranch expecting dust, mesquite, and the empty porch I'd left behind. Instead, I found a locked cedar gate across my property and 2 luxury mansions sitting beyond it. The HOA president told me the land wasn't mine anymore. Then she handed me the recording number for a deed carrying my own signature. There was just one problem. I had never signed it. And when I started checking the boundary, I discovered someone hadn't just changed the paperwork. They had moved the land marker itself. If you enjoy stories where patience, evidence, and the law matter more than shouting, subscribe and stay with me, because those 2 mansions were only the beginning. The first thing I saw was the roof, red tile, bright under the Arizona sun, sitting where there had never been anything but scrub, rock, and 6 acres of land with my name on the deed. Then I saw the second one. I took my foot off the gas. My pickup rolled another 20 yards before stopping in the middle of the dirt road. For almost a year, I had been overseas supervising a water treatment project that ran on 12-hour shifts and bad coffee. Every night, when the work trailers went quiet, I pictured Walker Mesa Ranch exactly as I had left it. The old porch, the mesquite along the wash, the western bench where my wife Sarah used to sit with me and watch the light drop behind the ridge. I had expected dust. I had expected repairs. I had not expected 2 mansions. Fresh asphalt curved across the western bench. Pale stucco walls rose behind landscaped stone. 2 blue swimming pools flashed in the sunlight. And directly across the ranch track stood a cedar gate I had never seen before. A metal sign was bolted to the center. Red Canyon Estates Western Reserve Private Access. I shut off the engine. For a few seconds, I just listened. Pool equipment hummed somewhere beyond the wall. A sprinkler clicked over decorative grass that had no business growing in that part of Arizona. My own house still stood farther up the slope, but now it looked like something left behind by accident. I got out and took my phone from my pocket. First the gate, then the road, then both houses, then the property line as I remembered it. I had spent most of my career around construction sites. When something went wrong, you documented before you argued. That habit probably saved me from doing something stupid. A woman came down the paved drive while I was photographing the second house. She looked to be around 50, dressed in cream slacks and a blue blouse, sunglasses on, phone in one hand. "You can't park there," she said. I lowered my phone. "This is my road." She stopped. Her expression changed, but only slightly. "I'm Deborah Whitmore, president of Red Canyon Estates, Ethan Walker." That got a reaction. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. She covered it quickly. "I see." I pointed past the gate. "Those houses are on Walker Mesa Ranch." "No," she said. "They're part of Western Reserve. I own Western Reserve. You owned that parcel." I looked at her for a long second. "Owned?" "The boundary was adjusted last year." "No, it wasn't." Her voice stayed calm, almost patient. "Mr. Walker, the 6-acre bench was legally transferred to a development entity associated with Red Canyon Estates. The county recorded it months ago. I never transferred anything. You may want to speak with your attorney. I probably will." That seemed to annoy her more than if I had shouted. She stepped closer to the gate. "The homes are occupied. There are families here now. Whatever disagreement you have with the county, I strongly suggest you not interfere with residents." I looked through the cedar slats. One mansion sat almost exactly where Sarah and I had once talked about building a small workshop. "You built this while I was gone. Construction was properly permitted." That wasn't my question. Her jaw tightened. "We relied on recorded ownership documents." I raised my phone again and photographed the sign. Deborah's voice sharpened. "I'd also advise you not to cross this gate. You are not a member of the association, and this is private HOA property." That landed harder than I expected, not because I believed her, because she had said it while standing on land I had paid taxes on for 18 years. I stepped toward the edge of the new landscaping. Something caught my eye near her shoe. A round brass cap, half buried under white gravel. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. Stamped into the metal were 4 characters. UM17, I knew that marker. My father had shown it to me when we surveyed the Western Bench years before Red Canyon Estates existed. But WM17 was not supposed to be beside this gate. It was supposed to sit nearly 200 feet east of us. I crouched and took a photograph. Deborah glanced down. "What are you doing?" "Documenting. It's a survey marker." "I know." For the first time, she looked uncomfortable. Only for a second. Then the polished expression came back. "Mr. Walker, I'm trying to be respectful, but showing up after a year and making accusations isn't going to undo a recorded transaction." I stood. "I haven't accused you of anything." "Good. Not yet." The wind moved dust across the asphalt between us. Deborah opened a leather folder she had been carrying against her side and removed a single sheet. I expected this might come up eventually. She held it through the bars of the gate. At the top was a county seal. Below it was a recording number. And beneath that, a legal description for 6 acres of land identified as the Western Bench of Walker Mesa Ranch. I read until I reached the signature line. Then I stopped. Ethan Walker, my name written in black ink. Close enough to fool someone who had never seen me sign a check. Not close enough to fool me. I looked up at Deborah. She gave me a small, controlled smile. "The county has the original." I folded the copy once and slipped it into my shirt pocket. Then I looked past her at the 2 houses, the pools, the road, and the cedar gate standing where my fence used to be. I had come home wondering who had built on my land. Now I had a different question. Who had signed my name to give it away? By 8 the next morning, I was standing at the county recorder's counter with Deborah's copy in one hand and my original deed in the other. The clerk pulled up Walker Mesa Ranch and frowned. "There's a later recording. I know. I want the complete file." She printed 23 pages. The document called itself a Boundary Adjustment and Transfer Agreement. According to it, I had conveyed 6 acres from Walker Mesa Ranch to Canyon West Development LLC for $10 and other valuable consideration. I had never heard of Canyon West Development. I had never received $10, and I sure as hell had never signed that agreement. The signature was good enough to survive a quick glance. Whoever made it had copied the long upward stroke in my W and the way I crowded the last letters of Walker. But they missed something simple. I never signed legal documents Ethan Walker. For 20 years I had signed them Ethan J. Walker. My middle initial appeared on my deed, tax filings, well permit, utility easements, and every county document involving the ranch. Not on this one. I asked for the electronic recording history, submission receipt, and every attachment connected to the filing. The clerk looked at me carefully. "You may want an attorney." I already called one. Laura Bennett arrived 40 minutes later. She was 43, practical, and had handled enough rural property disputes to know that a fence could cause more trouble than a house. She read the agreement without speaking, then she compared it with my deed. "Don't get excited yet. Someone forged my signature." "Probably." "Probably?" Laura tapped the recorded agreement. "This is evidence of fraud. It isn't a magic eraser. There are 2 finished homes sitting on that parcel now. If they've been sold, we may have buyers, lenders, title insurers, permits, contractors, and recorded interests stacked on top of this. So somebody steals my land, builds fast enough, and that makes it theirs? No. It makes fixing it complicated." That was the first thing anyone had said since I came home that actually frightened me. Not Deborah, not the gate. Complicated. Complicated meant time and money. It meant people who had done nothing wrong could now be living inside somebody else's fraud. Laura turned to the legal description. "Where does this boundary begin?" I leaned over. Point of commencement. Monument WM17. I read it again. Something tightened in my chest. Laura noticed. What? That marker. What about it? I saw it yesterday. Where? Beside the HOA gate. She waited. I pulled up the photograph on my phone. WM17 sat in white decorative gravel beside Deborah's cedar gate. Laura enlarged the image. You're sure that's the same monument? My father showed me WM17 when I was in my 20s. I took my original deed from the folder and found the survey exhibit attached behind it. There it was, WM17, the Western Reference Monument. I traced the measurements with my finger. Then I looked at the new agreement. The numbers didn't line up. Laura, that marker shouldn't be anywhere near their gate. How far off? Close to 200 feet. She stopped turning pages. That changed the room. A forged signature could be blamed on a bad contractor, a dishonest filing service, or some stranger nobody on the HOA board claimed to know. A moved survey monument was physical. Someone had to find it. Someone had to remove it. Someone had to put it somewhere else. Laura took out her phone. Don't go back there alone and don't touch that marker. I wasn't planning to. Good. We need a licensed surveyor. Preferably somebody who knows the old county work. I know one. Frank Delgado had retired years earlier, but he had surveyed half the mesa before subdivisions started crawling across it. I called him from the recorder's lobby. He answered on the fourth ring. Ethan? Morning, Frank. Haven't heard from you in a while. I've been overseas, so I heard. I need to ask you about WM17 silence, not confusion, recognition, Walker Mesa Western Bench. That's the one. What happened to it? I was hoping you could tell me where it's supposed to be. I can tell you exactly where it's supposed to be. I looked at Laura. Do you still have the field notes? Frank gave a dry little laugh. Ethan, I'm 70 next year. At my age, throwing away records feels like tempting God. When can you meet us? Give me an hour. Before leaving, Laura requested certified copies of the boundary agreement and the complete electronic submission package. The clerk stamped the request and handed us a receipt. Outside, I stopped beside my truck. The morning had already turned hot, but I barely noticed. Yesterday I had thought someone forged my name. Now I knew they had built an entire legal description around a monument that wasn't where it belonged. Laura closed her file. If WM17 has actually been moved, this stops looking like sloppy paperwork. What does it start looking like? She glanced at the photograph on my phone. Someone trying to move the land on paper after they moved the evidence on the ground. An hour later, Frank's old white Ford pulled onto Walker Mesa Ranch with survey cases strapped behind the cab. He stepped out carrying a faded field book. We walked past my house toward the western bench until Frank stopped in a patch of undisturbed ground well east of Deborah's new gate. He checked his notes, then his measurements. Then he pointed down. Here. At first I saw nothing. Frank scraped away loose dirt with the edge of his boot. A circular concrete socket appeared beneath it. Empty. He stared at the hole. So? Laura asked. Frank looked toward the cedar gate nearly 200 feet away. UM17 was set right here in 1998. I looked at the empty socket, then at the distant brass marker shining in Deborah's landscaping. The paperwork hadn't moved my boundary. Someone had physically moved the monument that proved where the boundary was. Frank knelt beside the empty concrete socket and brushed dirt from the rim with his fingertips. This wasn't erosion, he said, and it didn't pull itself out. Laura crouched next to him. How permanent was WM17? Permanent enough that removing it would take tools and intent. Frank opened his faded field book. His handwriting from nearly 30 years earlier ran in tight block letters beside measurements, bearings, and reference points. Read them twice. Then he stood. Let's confirm the new location. We walked toward the cedar gate. I stayed on my side of the old ranch line while Frank took measurements. Deborah's landscaped entrance sat ahead of us, clean and expensive, with crushed white stone spread around desert plants that looked newly delivered. WM-17 gleamed near the base of the gatepost. Frank stopped 10 feet from it. "That's the cap, you're sure?" He gave me a look. I stamped it. Laura pulled out her phone. "Nobody touches anything." Frank measured from 2 fixed points recorded in his field book, then compared the numbers. 187 feet, 4 inches from its original position. I photographed the marker from every angle, the cedar gate, the house behind it, the relation to the road. Then Laura had Frank stand beside the location, while she recorded him identifying the monument and explaining where it had originally been set. We were halfway through when Deborah appeared. This time she wasn't alone. A man in a polo shirt followed several steps behind her, holding a tablet. She stopped at the gate. "Mr. Walker, Ms. Whitmore." Her eyes moved to Frank's survey case. "What are you doing, checking my property line? This boundary has already been certified." Frank closed his field book, not by me. Deborah looked at him. "And you are?" "Frank Delgado, retired county surveyor." Something tightened around her mouth. "I don't believe retired personnel have authority to conduct official work here." Frank nodded toward the brass cap. "I don't need authority to recognize my own monument." The man behind Deborah looked down at it. She did not. Laura stepped forward. "Ms. Whitmore, we're documenting conditions. That's all. You've been told this is private HOA property. And you've been told ownership is disputed," Laura said. "Do not move, cover, alter, or destroy anything related to the boundary." Deborah's expression hardened. "Is that a threat?" "It's a preservation notice." She looked at me. "You came back after nearly a year and now you're disrupting residents, bringing surveyors around, taking photographs of my land. That remains to be determined." Frank cleared his throat. "No, the location of the original line doesn't." Deborah ignored him. "You need to understand something, Mr. Walker. Those homes represent substantial investment. Families bought them in good faith." I looked past her. A child's bicycle leaned against one of the garage walls. That mattered. Not because it made Deborah right, because it meant whoever had done this had placed innocent people on top of the problem. "I understand that better than you think," I said. "Then stop escalating this." Laura gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "Your association is standing beside a relocated survey monument while claiming my client's land. He isn't the one escalating." Deborah turned toward Laura. "The HOA followed recorded documents." "Good," Laura said. "Then preserving every document should be easy." That ended the conversation, not because Deborah had nothing to say, because she suddenly had too many things to think about. She went back through the gate without another word. The man with the tablet followed. Frank watched them disappear behind that wall. She knew what that marker was. Laura nodded. "I think so too." We returned to the original socket. Frank turned several pages in his field book until he found the Western Bench survey. He handed it to Laura. Near the bottom was a notation in red pencil. "Western Bench excluded from all future subdivision access and development." Laura read it slowly. "Who requested this restriction?" "My father and the original developer," I said. "They didn't want subdivision traffic crossing the ranch." Frank pointed to the initials beside it, recorded in the survey package too. That mattered more than the moved marker. If the restriction had been in the original county survey, no competent boundary review should have treated those 6 acres as ordinary expansion land. Laura closed the book. "We're sending formal preservation letters today. HOA developer, county planning, title company, every contractor tied to those houses, for the marker, for everything." She looked toward the 2 mansions, survey files, emails, board minutes, permit applications, digital submissions, construction records. "Nobody gets to clean up after themselves now." For the first time since I had returned, the situation felt less like a theft I had discovered, and more like a case that could be built. That feeling lasted until Laura put a hand on my shoulder. "Don't get comfortable." "What?" "Deb knows we found WM-17. I looked back toward the cedar gate. So until today, she could pretend this was a paperwork dispute. Laura slid the preservation letter into her folder. "Now she knows we found physical evidence." The wind pushed a little dust across the empty socket at our feet. Laura's voice dropped. "Once Deborah realizes that, Ethan, she's going to stop pretending this was a misunderstanding." She was right. 48 hours later, 3 envelopes arrived by certified mail. The first accused me of trespassing on Red Canyon Estates property. The second ordered me to stop photographing residents, survey markers, and construction activity. The third was worse. It claimed my actions were threatening property values and interfering with the quiet enjoyment of homeowners who had purchased in good faith. I read that line twice. Quiet enjoyment. I was sitting at my own kitchen table, looking through the window at a cedar gate that had been built across my land. Laura arrived before noon and spread the notices beside the original deed. "They're building a record," she said. "Against me, against the version of you they want a judge to see." I leaned back. An absentee rancher comes home angry and starts harassing families. Exactly. Even though they moved my survey monument. Facts don't stop people from trying a narrative. She circled one paragraph with her pen. "Don't answer any of this yourself." I wasn't planning to. Good. Let them keep writing. That afternoon, my phone rang from a number I didn't know. A woman spoke quietly. "Is this Ethan Walker?" "Yes, my name is Megan Foster. I live in Red Canyon Estates." I waited. "I used to be HOA secretary. That changed things. She asked me to meet her at a diner off Route 89, 20 miles from the ranch." "No lawyers in the booth," she said. "Not yet. I called Laura anyway. She told me to go. Listen more than you talk." Megan was already there when I arrived, sitting in the back with a coffee she hadn't touched and a canvas folder pressed against her side. She was 46, tired-looking, careful. "I resigned from the board 6 months ago," she said. "Why?" "Because Deborah stopped asking us to vote on things before she did them." She pushed the folder across the table. Inside were planning packets stamped Red Canyon Estates, Phase 2. I flipped through site maps, 32 proposed homes, a new internal road, utility extensions, drainage plans. Then one sheet stopped me. Fire access and emergency egress, a red line ran west from the proposed expansion, straight across my 6-acre bench. I looked up. Megan nodded. "That road is the problem." "What problem?" "The county wouldn't approve Phase 2 with only one entrance. Too many homes. Fire department wanted secondary emergency access, and the only place to put it is here, on your bench." I studied the map again. The 2 mansions already standing on my land were shown at the eastern edge of the 6 acres, positioned beside the future road corridor. "Built those first, yes." "Why?" Megan glanced toward the diner windows before answering. "Deborah told the board that once residential use was established on the bench, the county would have a harder time treating it like isolated ranch property." My hand tightened around the edge of the paper. So the houses weren't the project. No, they were the foothold. Megan looked relieved that I understood. Phase 2 is the project. The anger I felt then was different from the anger at the gate. That had been personal. This was calculated. 32 homes meant millions in development value. My 6 acres were not valuable because of the view. They were valuable because without them, the western expansion had no second way out. Who owns the development company? Not the HOA directly. Canyon West Development, the same name on the forged boundary agreement. Megan pulled out another page. Deborah told residents the expansion would raise property values. She also said the western bench had been acquired from an owner who no longer used it. I laughed once. Not because anything was funny, She knew my name. She knew more than that. Megan hesitated. Then she slid over a photocopy of board minutes from 9 months earlier. One sentence had been underlined. Western access must be secured before Phase 2 final submission. Beside it, handwritten initials, D.W. Deborah Whitmore. I stared at the page. They hadn't stolen 6 acres because they wanted 2 mansions. They had built 2 mansions because they needed my land to make a 32-home expansion possible. Laura met me back at the ranch before sunset. I handed her the Phase 2 packet. She went straight to the emergency access sheet. Her expression changed. This is motive. It gets better. I showed her the board minutes. She read them once, then again. If Phase 2 needs this road, the entire expansion depends on your land. I looked beyond the porch toward the 2 new roofs. Yesterday, they had looked like the crime. Now they looked like evidence of something much larger. Laura closed the folder. Deborah didn't take your 6 acres for what was sitting on them. No. She took them for what they unlocked. The cedar gate stood in the distance, bright in the last light. For the first time, I understood why they had been willing to forge documents, move a survey monument, and tell me not to step onto my own property. Without Walker Mesa Ranch, Phase 2 had nowhere to go. My first instinct was to confront Deborah with the planning packet. Laura stopped me. No. She needs to know we have it. She needs to think we don't. I looked at her across my kitchen table. Laura tapped the board minutes with one finger. Right now, Deborah still believes she controls the story. Let her keep talking. That was harder than it sounded. 2 days later, Red Canyon Estates announced an emergency HOA meeting. The notice went to every homeowner. Subject: threat to community access and property values. My name was in the second paragraph. Deborah described me as an absentee ranch owner challenging long-established residential rights. She claimed I was attempting to disrupt innocent families and obstruct emergency planning. Nothing about the moved survey marker. Nothing about the forged signature. Nothing about Phase 2. Laura read the notice and smiled without humor. She's getting nervous, looks pretty confident to me. Confident people don't hold emergency meetings to explain why they aren't stealing your land. I wanted to attend. Laura told me not to. If you walk into that room, she makes you the event. Stay home. Make her explain herself without you. So I did. That evening, I sat on the old porch while the HOA met less than half a mile away. I could see lights through the subdivision clubhouse windows. Every few minutes, a car pulled in. Then my phone buzzed. Megan, they're voting on a resolution. I called her. What kind? Her voice was low. Deborah wants the board to formally reaffirm that the HOA has possessed the western bench continuously and without objection. I stood up. Without objection? I know. She has 3 certified letters proving I've objected. Eric just said the same thing. Eric Dalton was the HOA treasurer. I had seen his name on financial reports Megan gave us, but I had never met him. What happened? Deborah told him the resolution only confirms the board's existing position. After she received Laura's preservation notice, yes. That mattered. Before I came home, Deborah could claim she relied on someone else's paperwork. Now she knew ownership was disputed. Anything she signed from this point forward carried a different weight. Can you get a copy? If they pass it. Then Megan hung up. 20 minutes later, Laura arrived. She had already received the same information through Megan. This is exactly what I meant, she said. She's making a new record. After notice, knowing it's disputed. Laura nodded. Let her. Across the darkening mesa, the clubhouse lights stayed on. I hated sitting there. Every part of me wanted to drive down, walk into the meeting, put Frank's field book on the table, and ask Deborah how land could be occupied without objection when the owner was standing 10 feet away, telling her to get off it. But anger would help her. Paper would help me. So I waited. At 8:17, Megan texted again. Eric refused to sign. A minute later, Deborah is furious. Then, she's saying the board has to protect Phase 2. Laura read the messages beside me. "They're what?" She said Phase 2 out loud in the same meeting where they're reaffirming ownership. Still not enough. No, but it's useful. My phone rang again. This time Megan didn't whisper. Eric walked out. "What happened?" He told Deborah he wouldn't put his name on something that says you never objected. And the vote? She pushed it through anyway. "Who signed?" There was a pause. "Deborah," I looked at Laura. "Alone?" She signed as president and certified the resolution herself. Laura's face went still. "Did Megan photograph it?" I asked. "She's trying." 10 minutes passed. Then an image arrived. A single sheet on a conference table. Red Canyon Estates, Homeowners Association Board Resolution. Western Reserve. The language was clean, formal, confident. The association had occupied the 6-acre bench continuously. The association had relied on valid recorded instruments. The association had received no timely objection to its possession or development rights. At the bottom was Deborah Whitmore's signature, dated that night. Laura enlarged it. "She knows you've objected. Yes, she knows we're challenging the deed. Yes, she knows the monument moved. Yes." Laura handed the phone back. Then she just stopped defending an old lie. I looked at Deborah's signature on the screen. What did she start doing? Creating a new one. For the first time since I came home, I didn't feel like I was chasing them. Deborah was moving toward us, and she was bringing her own paperwork with her. The next morning, Megan came to the ranch with a printed copy of the resolution. Not the version emailed to homeowners, the board copy. She placed it on my kitchen table beside Frank's field notes and Laura's certified recorder documents. "There," she said. A handwritten note ran along the lower margin in blue ink. "We only need this clean long enough to close Phase 2. I read it once, then again. Laura leaned over my shoulder. "That's Deborah's handwriting?" Megan nodded. "I've worked with her for 4 years. She writes all her notes in blue. Can you prove it? I have meeting packets, Christmas cards, reimbursement approvals. Pick one." Laura looked at me. "This is useful. Useful. It's not the final link, but it shows exactly why they needed the resolution." Before I could answer, a truck pulled up outside. Eric Dalton stepped out. He looked older than 58 that morning. He came inside but didn't sit. "I shouldn't be here." Megan folded her arms. "Then why are you?" Eric glanced at the papers, because she asked us to backdate the resolution. The room went quiet. Laura took out a legal pad. "Deborah asked you personally at the meeting. She said the board needed the record to show continuity." "What date?" "The date Phase 2 was first submitted." "Months ago." "Yes. Did you agree?" "No." "Will you say that under oath?" Eric looked toward the window. That answer took longer. "I don't know." Laura didn't push. "Why not?" "Because I'm the treasurer. My name is on every account, every check, every transfer. If this becomes fraud litigation, I'm standing in the middle of it." "You may already be standing in the middle of it," she said. That landed. Eric rubbed both hands over his face. "I need my own attorney. You should get one." He looked at me. "I'm sorry. I didn't tell him it was fine." It wasn't. But he had come. That mattered. By noon, he was gone. At 3, a black SUV rolled through my front gate. 2 men stepped out in pressed shirts and expensive boots. The taller one introduced himself as counsel for Canyon West Development. They had an offer. $1.4 million for the 6-acre bench. Immediate closing. No admission of wrongdoing. Each side paid its own legal fees. The existing homes stayed where they were. I almost laughed. Yesterday, the HOA said they already owned it. The attorney didn't blink. "This is an effort to avoid prolonged uncertainty, meaning litigation could take years." Laura arrived halfway through the conversation. and read the offer in silence. The developer's representative added another number, 1.6, then 1.8, if I signed within 72 hours. For the first time since I came home, I felt tired enough to listen. I thought about the months overseas, about coming back alone, about how much simpler it would be to take the money, buy land farther north, and let Red Canyon Estates choke on its own asphalt. That night I sat on the porch with the offer folded beside me. Laura came out and, "You thinking about it? Wouldn't you?" "I'd think about anything with 7 figures." I looked toward the 2 mansions. "If I take it, this ends, your case ends, same thing." "No," I turned to her. She nodded toward the settlement papers. "If the land was really theirs, why are they trying so hard to buy it from you now?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The next morning, I rejected the offer. No counteroffer, no negotiation, just no. By noon, Canyon West withdrew the 72-hour deadline. By afternoon, Megan called again. "Deborah's furious, about the money, about Eric." What did he do? He hired a lawyer. That was the first real crack. Not in the deed, not in the survey, in the people holding Deborah's story together. Laura spent the rest of the day preparing subpoenas for the original electronic filing package tied to the boundary adjustment. "If there was a survey attached to that transfer," she said, "I want the exact file that went in, not the public copy. The original submission." 2 days later, the county produced it. The package contained the agreement, the signature page, the filing receipt, and one attachment missing from the public portal. Exhibit C. Laura opened the PDF. A survey map filled the screen. My name appeared in the approval box, and a red access corridor cut straight through the center of my 6 acres. Laura stared at the file properties. Then she stopped breathing for half a second. "What?" She turned their laptop toward me. The creation date was 6 weeks before I supposedly signed the transfer. The author field contained a user account registered to the Red Canyon Estates office. Laura pointed at the screen. "They built the map before they had your consent." I looked at the red corridor again. The road to Phase 2 had been drawn before anyone had the legal right to draw it. And for the first time, Deborah's plan was beginning to show through the paper itself. Laura printed Exhibit C and laid it beside Frank's field book. At first glance, the map looked ordinary: parcel lines, bearings, access notes, a clean title block. But Frank stared at it for less than a minute before pointing to 3 measurements along the western edge. Those numbers came from my original survey. Laura looked at him. Could they have been pulled from public records? No. Why not? Frank opened his field book. The recorded plat rounds these bearings. My working notes don't. He placed his finger beneath one handwritten figure. Exhibit C matched it exactly to the second. "So whoever created this had your field notes?" I asked. "Or a copy of them?" "Who had access?" Frank thought for a moment. "County Survey Archive. Maybe planning, if somebody requested the old package." Laura made another note. "Not the HOA, not legally." That word hung there. Laura pulled up the file metadata again. Created 6 weeks before my supposed signature, modified 3 times. Final saved version. 3 days before the boundary adjustment agreement was submitted. The user account was tied to Red Canyon Estates Administration. "Can we say Deborah made it?" I asked. No, Laura's answer came fast. "Not yet. It came from her office. That ties the document to the HOA, not to her personally." I hated that distinction. It was exactly the kind of distinction a courtroom could turn into reasonable doubt. Laura pointed to the screen. "Deborah has already built her defense. Contractors handled filings. Professionals prepared documents. She relied on what she was given, but the map was built around Phase 2. We can prove that. And my survey data was used. We can prove that too." "Then what are we missing?" Laura looked at me, her hand on the switch. The next move came from Deborah. Her attorney filed a response seeking to dismiss our challenge as an untimely boundary dispute. The filing described the two mansion owners as innocent purchasers and argued that reopening the Western Bench would cause irreparable community harm. It also attached an affidavit signed by Deborah. I read one sentence twice. I had no direct involvement in the preparation or submission of the boundary adjustment documents. Laura smiled when she saw it. Not because it helped Deborah, because Deborah had finally committed herself under oath. Now she can't move later, Laura said, unless she's telling the truth. Then somebody else inside her office designed a fraudulent map for a development she was running. Neither possibility helped her much. Still, Laura wasn't satisfied. We needed the person, instruction, or board record that connected Deborah directly to the filing. Frank spent the afternoon comparing Exhibit C with the original survey materials. Near dusk, he called us back to the table. Found something. He pointed to a note printed beside the proposed emergency road. Width held at 32 ft per WM field control. Looked at him. Walker Mesa, that's not unusual. No, this is... Frank flipped to a page near the back of his old book. There in pencil was the same abbreviation beside an internal reference line, WM field control. This wording never appeared on the recorded plat, he said. Laura leaned closer. So whoever built Exhibit C had access to your actual working file. Yes. Can the county tell us who checked it out, if the request was logged? The next morning, Laura sent another records demand. By afternoon, the county responded. The archive log showed one digital scan request for Frank's Walker Mesa field book 14 months earlier. Requested by Red Canyon Estates HOA authorized contact D. Whitmore. I stared at the line. There she is. Laura shook her head. Closer. How much closer do you need? Enough that her lawyer can't say she requested an old survey for general planning. She was right. And I hated that too. A survey request proved knowledge. It did not yet prove she ordered the forged transfer, but the walls were narrowing. That evening, Megan called. I heard about the archive request. How? Eric's lawyer asked the board for document preservation. Did Deborah answer? She told everyone not to discuss old files without counsel present. That sounds healthy. Megan didn't laugh. There's more. She wants a special meeting tomorrow. For what? To appoint outside counsel and formally distance the board from the boundary filing. Laura, listening on speaker, raised an eyebrow. Distance how? By claiming Canyon West handled everything. There it was, the next layer of defense. Blame the developer, blame contractors, blame anyone except Deborah. I looked again at Exhibit C, the red access corridor cut through my 6 acres with perfect confidence, as if the people drawing it had believed ownership was just another detail to fix later. Laura gathered the papers into a single stack. We've proven the transfer was designed in advance. We've proven the HOA requested Frank's private field material. We've proven the map came from their office, but not Deborah, not directly. Outside, the Western Bench was going dark behind the cedar gate. 2 mansion windows lit up one by one. The plan was no longer hidden. Only the final hand behind it was. And until we could prove whose hand that was, Deborah still had somewhere to hide. The preliminary property hearing began 6 days later. Judge Rebecca Monroe took the bench at 9 sharp. She was 62, silver-haired, direct, and unimpressed by the stacks of paper both sides had brought into her courtroom. I am not trying the entire case today, she said. I am deciding whether ownership is sufficiently disputed to justify injunctive relief and whether further development should stop while the evidence is examined. That mattered. Phase 2 was still technically alive. If Deborah kept the 6-acre transfer standing long enough, Canyon West could continue pushing permits while we fought. Laura wanted the opposite. Freeze everything. Make them prove they're right before another dollar went into the Western Bench. Deborah sat across the aisle beside 2 attorneys. She looked exactly as she had at the cedar gate, controlled, prepared. Her lawyer stood first. This is, at its heart, an old boundary disagreement complicated by Mr. Walker's long absence. I felt Laura's hand touch my sleeve. Stay still, the attorney continued. 2 homes have been purchased in good faith. Families live there. Lenders have relied on recorded instruments. Contractors relied on permits. Mr. Walker now asks this court to destabilize all of that because he disputes a signature and remembers a survey monument differently. Remembers. That word was deliberate. Frank leaned forward behind us. Laura stood. We don't intend to ask the court to rely on Mr. Walker's memory. She placed my original deed on the evidence table, Exhibit 1. Recorded ownership of Walker Mesa Ranch, then Frank's field book, Exhibit 2. Original survey control and a western bench exclusion. Then a photograph of the empty concrete socket and another of WM17 beside the HOA gate. Exhibit 3. The same numbered survey monument relocated 187 feet from its recorded position. The courtroom went quiet. Then Laura displayed Exhibit C, Exhibit 4, a survey map omitted from the public portal, created before Mr. Walker allegedly consented to any transfer, and generated through an account associated with Red Canyon Estates. Deborah's lawyer rose. Associated is doing a great deal of work there. Judge Monroe looked at Laura. Can you tie creation of the document to Ms. Whitmore? Not personally, Your Honor. Not yet. That was the weakness. Everyone in the room heard it. Deborah's attorney did too. He stood straighter. Exactly. Laura didn't flinch. We can, however, establish that Red Canyon Estates requested non-public working survey material from the county archive before Exhibit C was created. She handed up the archive log. Judge Monroe studied it. Authorized contact. D. Whitmore. Deborah's attorney answered immediately. Miss Whitmore oversaw numerous planning matters. Requesting a historical survey does not establish fraud. Judge Monroe nodded once. That's correct. I hated how reasonable it sounded. Deborah took the stand later that morning. Her attorney kept the questions narrow. Did you personally prepare the boundary adjustment agreement? No. Did you personally create Exhibit C? No. Did you forge Mr. Walker's signature? Absolutely not. Who handled those materials? Outside consultants working with Canyon West Development. And what did you rely on? Recorded documents, professional submissions, and county approvals. She said it cleanly. No hesitation, no anger, just enough truth wrapped around whatever she was hiding. Laura crossed. When did you first learn Ethan Walker disputed ownership? The day he returned. Yet afterward, you signed a board resolution stating the HOA had occupied the land without objection. I signed a resolution reflecting the association's legal position. Even though you knew the owner was objecting? I knew he was making a claim. Laura let the distinction sit. Then she placed Deborah's handwritten note on the screen. We only need this clean long enough to close Phase 2. You wrote this? Deborah looked at it. That appears to be my handwriting. What did clean mean? Administratively resolved. And Phase 2, the planned western expansion, which required emergency access across Mr. Walker's 6 acres. Our consultants advised that access was necessary. Laura stepped closer. So you requested the original survey, knew the western bench controlled Phase 2 access, and signed a resolution after Mr. Walker returned. But you want this court to believe you had no direct involvement in the transfer itself? Deborah's attorney stood, argumentative, sustained. Deborah looked at me then. For the first time, I saw something behind the calm. Not panic, confidence. She still believed Laura couldn't cross that last gap, and she might have been right. Judge Monroe called a short recess. Laura and I stepped into the hallway. We have enough to freeze development, she said, but not enough to finish her. Not yet. At the far end of the corridor, the courthouse doors opened. Eric Dalton walked in. He wasn't alone. A gray-haired attorney carried a document case beside him. Eric looked exhausted, but he kept walking until he reached Laura. I need to change my statement. Laura studied him. Why? Eric looked past us toward the courtroom doors, because Deborah's lawyer just blamed Canyon West for everything. He tightened his grip on the folder. And I have the board document she thought was gone. The bailiff opened the courtroom door and called everyone back inside. Eric took one breath, then followed us in. His attorney asked Judge Monroe for permission to supplement the record. Deborah's lawyer objected immediately. This hearing has already exceeded its intended scope. Judge Monroe looked at Eric. Mr. Dalton, are you represented? Yes, Your Honor. And you're asking to correct or expand prior information? Yes, she nodded. I'll hear it. Eric opened the document case. Inside was an original Red Canyon Estates board packet. Not a photocopy, not a screenshot. Paper, staples, handwritten notes, meeting attachments. The kind of thing people stop worrying about once they think every important decision has moved into email. Laura took the packet and began carefully. Mr. Dalton, do you recognize this? Yes, what is it? The board packet from the meeting where the Western Bench transfer was first discussed. Deborah shifted in her chair. Laura turned to the page Eric had marked. Near the bottom was Deborah's handwriting, backdated and closed before Walker returns. Nobody spoke. Even the sound of paper moving stopped. Laura looked at Eric. Who wrote that, Deborah? How do you know? I watched her write it. Deborah's attorney stood. Objection. This document has not been authenticated. Megan was already waiting outside. 10 minutes later, she was sworn in. She identified the packet format, the board numbering system, Deborah's handwriting, and the meeting sequence from her time as secretary. Then Laura placed the later resolution beside it. We only need this clean long enough to close Phase 2, 2 notes, 2 different dates, same handwriting, same project, same 6 acres. Laura didn't raise her voice. Ms. Foster, was Ethan Walker's consent ever presented to the board at that first meeting? No. Was there discussion of his absence? Yes. What kind? Megan looked toward Deborah, that he was overseas and probably wouldn't be back before Phase 2 closed. My stomach tightened. Laura turned to Frank. He confirmed one final point. The legal description attached to the transfer used measurements copied from his non-public field notes. Without those measurements, whoever drafted Exhibit C could not have drawn the access corridor where they did. The pieces were no longer scattered. They formed a sequence. Deborah requested the old survey. The map was created before my supposed consent. The board discussed closing before I returned. My signature appeared afterward. WM17 was moved. Then, after I came home and objected, Deborah signed a new resolution claiming there had been no objection. Laura returned to their lectern. Ms. Whitmore testified this morning that outside consultants handled the transfer and that she had no direct involvement. Deborah's attorney stood. Laura held up the original packet. This instruction predates the filing. Then she held up the later resolution. This instruction comes after Mr. Walker returned. Judge Monroe looked at Deborah. Counsel? Her lawyer leaned close to her and whispered. For the first time since I met Deborah at the Cedar Gate, she looked unsure of what came next. Not angry, not offended, unsure. Her lawyer finally said, Your Honor, these notes are being interpreted beyond their context. Judge Monroe's voice stayed level. Then provide the context. He didn't. That silence did more damage than any speech Laura could have made. I sat beside her and watched Deborah stare at the 2 pages on the evidence table. She had used paperwork as a wall. Now the wall had turned transparent. Judge Monroe called a short recess to review the supplemented record. Nobody moved quickly. Eric sat with his attorney, pale but calmer. Megan stayed near the back. Frank closed his field book and rested both hands on it. Deborah didn't look at any of us. When Judge Monroe returned, the room stood. She sat. Then we did. I am prepared to make interim findings regarding ownership and development activity, she said. My pulse kicked once. The evidence before this court strongly supports the conclusion that the boundary adjustment, was not the product of an ordinary administrative mistake. Deborah's lawyer began to rise. Judge Monroe lifted one hand. "I'm not finished." He sat down. "The relocation of WM-17, the timing of Exhibit C, the use of non-public survey measurements, and the handwritten board instructions create a consistent factual pattern." Laura didn't move. Neither did I. Judge Monroe continued. "I am therefore ordering all Phase 2 permitting, construction, transfer activity, and further encumbrance affecting the disputed 6 acres frozen pending final written disposition. That alone would have killed the expansion for now. But she wasn't done. The court will also address the status of the boundary adjustment instrument itself." Deborah finally looked up, and because 2 completed residential structures now sit on the disputed parcel, the court will determine what legal remedy applies to those improvements if title is restored to Mr. Walker. There it was, the question nobody had answered from the beginning: the 2 mansions, the families, the lenders, the money already buried in concrete, tile, plumbing, and glass. Judge Monroe closed the file in front of her. "I will issue the final ruling after review of the ownership record, the fraudulent instrument evidence, and the interests attached to those structures." The gavel came down once. Deborah remained seated. I looked through the courtroom window toward the hard Arizona light outside. For 9 chapters of this fight, everyone had argued about who owned 6 acres. Now the court was about to decide something even bigger. What happened to everything they had built on them? Judge Monroe's written ruling came 4 days later. Laura called me before sunrise. "Ownership is yours." I sat up in bed. All 6 acres? All 6. The boundary adjustment agreement was declared void. The court found that the recorded transfer could not stand against the original deed, the survey evidence, the relocated monument, and the documents showing the transfer had been constructed around Phase 2 before I supposedly consented. Phase 2 was frozen indefinitely, without lawful secondary emergency access across Walker Mesa Ranch. Red Canyon Estates could not move forward with the 32-home expansion. Then Laura read the last section. The court was referring the suspected forged filings and altered records to the county attorney for separate investigation. Deborah's problems were no longer mine to prosecute. That part belonged to the law, but the mansions were more complicated. Judge Monroe refused to order an immediate demolition. The families living there had relied on title records, lenders, and permits they had no reason to believe were defective. Instead, the court gave Canyon West, the title insurers, the lenders, and me 60 days to resolve the unauthorized improvements. I understood why. Justice wasn't supposed to create new victims just because I had been one. Canyon West called Laura before lunch. Their first offer was money. A lot of it. They would purchase the 6 acres, cover my legal fees, and leave both homes where they stood. I said no. Their second offer was higher. I still said no. On the third call, Laura put them on speaker. "What do you actually want, Mr. Walker?" their attorney asked. My land, a pause. "And the structures, those are your problem until we settle." That changed the conversation. The 2 mansions had gone from symbols of Phase 2 to expensive liabilities sitting on property. Canyon West no longer controlled. The lenders wanted clean title. The insurers wanted claims capped. The developer wanted out. And the HOA wanted the entire subject to disappear. 3 weeks later, we signed the settlement. Canyon West transferred both structures to me, paid for restoration of the original Walker Mesa boundary, covered the survey and legal costs tied to the dispute, and released every claim to Western access. The families living in the houses were protected through separate arrangements, while ownership transitioned. Nobody got thrown onto the road. Nobody lost a home overnight. The people who created the problem paid to untangle it. That was enough for me. Deborah resigned before the settlement was final. Red Canyon Estates called it a leadership transition. Megan called it what it was. She ran out of people willing to sign things for her. Eric remained on the board long enough to help turn over records to new council, then stepped down too. A replacement board suspended Phase 2 and formally withdrew every claim to the Western Bench. Frank came back one morning with a county survey crew. They reset WM17 in its original socket. I watched the brass cap settle into place where it had belonged all along. 187 feet can look like nothing on a map. On the ground, it had been the distance between theft and truth. The cedar gate came last. A contractor asked if I wanted it removed. I looked at the sign Deborah had once stood behind, Red Canyon Estates, Western Reserve. Take the sign, the gate, leave it. He looked surprised. Locked? No, so the sign came down. The gate stayed, open. Months later, the Western bench felt different. Not because the houses were gone, they weren't. One became a long-term rental after the original occupants moved by choice. I kept the other available for family and friends. I changed some of the landscaping, pulled out the decorative grass, and let the desert come back around the edges. The houses stopped looking like monuments to somebody else's arrogance. They became buildings, nothing more. One evening, Megan drove up and parked near the porch. She looked toward the open gate. You know, Deborah hated that thing being left open. That's one reason I like it. She laughed. Then we stood there for a while without talking. The mesa was quiet again. No board meetings, no certified threats, no contractors measuring a road across my land, just wind moving through mesquite and the dry wash catching the last light. I thought about the day I came home. 2 red roofs, a locked gate, a woman telling me not to trespass on my own ranch. I had wanted to tear that gate out of the ground. If I had, Deborah would have called me unstable. If I had threatened anyone, she would have called me dangerous. If I had let anger make the decisions, I might have given her exactly the story she wanted. Instead, we kept the deed. We found the marker, we followed the map. We let her keep signing. And eventually, the paper she trusted more than the truth became the thing that buried her claim. I sat on the old porch after Megan left. The 2 mansions stood below the ridge. The cedar gate rested open beside the road. For the first time since I returned, nobody was pretending the land belonged to someone else. I hadn't won because I was louder. I hadn't won because I frightened anybody. I won because the boundary had never moved. Only the monument had. And once we put the truth back where it belonged, everything else had to move around it.
Maybe that's the lesson we're carrying away from Ethan's story. When something important is written, anger may come first, but anger doesn't have to make the decision. Ethan photographed the gate instead of tearing it down. He kept his deed. He found the original surveys. He listened to people who knew the law, and he gave the evidence time to speak. In the end, patience wasn't weakness. It was what kept him from becoming the person Deborah was trying to portray. And there was something else worth remembering. Justice didn't require innocent families to suffer for decisions they didn't make. Ethan got his 6 acres back, the inspection stopped, and the people caught in the middle were given a fair way forward. That's a quieter kind of justice, but sometimes it's the kind that lasts. If you had come home and found 2 houses sitting on land you never showed, would you have stood your ground the way Ethan did? Taiwan, if you would have fought it through the proper legal channels, or 0 if you think you would have taken the settlements and moved on. And if you ever deal with an HOA or property dispute yourself, say what happened. Someone reading your comment may learn from it. If story about land, dignity, and ordinary people calmly standing up for what they mean something to you, subscribe and stay with us. There are more HOA and rare story ahead.